welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
This is Jessica with the Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast, and our guest today is the author of one of my favorite books of 2021. As soon as it came across my desk, I knew it was going to be a book I needed to read, and as soon as I began it, I knew it was going to be a book that I was going to love, and I am going to just let her introduce herself.
Hello, nice to just be chatting with you and sort of the members of the Syosset Public Library community. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Ryka Aoki, and I have a new book out. It's Light from Uncommon Stars. And I've been a writer for many years. I had been writing a lot of essays and a lot of poetry and working with small presses. This is my first foray into science fiction and fantasy, and I'm really enjoying the process. This is a book that I have been wanting to write for a very long time, even though I have not written science fiction and fantasy. Many of the authors that I grew up with were amazing science fiction and fantasy writers, and I think maybe I was a little bit intimidated coming up through. Some people say, you know, there's a hierarchy between literary fiction and genre fiction. I really never felt that. I always thought that the great science fiction and fantasy writers were the ones I was really intimidated by. They had so much imagination and so much chutzpah. You know, they just said it. My book is my realization that I've grown as a writer and as a human, and I get to write the stories that I want to write. Light from Uncommon Stars is a fantasy and science fiction mashup, and it is centered in the neighborhood in which I grew up, the San Gabriel Valley in Southern California. It's a part of Los Angeles that people don't know very much about, much in the same way, on a different scale, of course, but, you know, much in the same way, if you say you're from New York, everyone's going to ask, how far are you from Manhattan, when we have to realize that the state is so much bigger than that. In the same way, on a city scale, when you say you're from Los Angeles, people don't understand all the beautiful neighborhoods around, and the San Gabriel Valley is one of them. I just thought, this book, instead of putting it in a place that I didn't know about, why not write about something that I did? If I write about my hometown, everybody has a hometown, and maybe they can see themselves in my words. I put everything I could into this book, and I would just really just be tickled pink if you all give it a try.
This book was just phenomenal in so many ways. It got blurbs from Charlie Jane Anders, which immediately was one of those things that told me, well, I need to read this book, because if she loves it, I'm going to love it as well. And before getting into the plot, because I want to talk about that as well, I really felt this overarching theme of change within the book, change within cultures, change within the way that we look at things. You talk about literary fiction versus genre fiction, and what an appropriate thing to bring up, because this book talks a little bit about what's considered art and what people react to. So your main character, Katrina, is a violinist. She just left home for the first time because she's trans and she wants to live as herself, and she can't do that in her home. So she's really just putting herself out there, and nothing but her violin and some clothes, and she finds herself in this situation that is beyond anything she could ever imagine. She finds herself under the tutelage of a violin teacher who has pretty much made a deal with the devil involving her violin students.
Mhm.
And I just could not believe the directions that this story took me in. And while Katrina is kind of finding herself, and unfortunately, the beginning of her story, she lands in the home of some people who aren't so great, and she hopes that they'd
Mhm.
be supportive. The home of the teacher who is literally pretty much putting Katrina's soul on the line for her own is the more supportive. And
Mhm.
where the story goes from there is just amazing.
Thank
When did
you.
this story begin to brew?
I don't want to give too much of the story away because the story began in two places, but the story itself, when I said, these are the pieces I'm going to put together, one of the events was I play quite a few musical instruments. I play the piano, I play the guitar, I play some flute. Um, I even know my way around a theremin. But I had gone with the person I was dating at the time to a violin store because we had found out that she had been a violinist, and I don't like past tense with anything musical. So I said, why don't we go look? And I realized that I had no idea how to play any of these instruments. I didn't have the foggiest, well, I did know which way was up and down, but I had no idea. And it amazed me that there is this entire world of instruments that I didn't know anything about, which clues you into the idea of these worlds happening that could be right next to you, but you have no idea exist. The other thing that I don't really want to talk too much about was I was coming home from a reading and I was flying home, and the plane was flying into LAX, and of course this is way before COVID, so I was on an airplane and nobody was losing their temper about wearing a mask. But anyway, it was a calm flight. And so there's this thing about flying into LAX. Los Angeles is an expanse. And when you fly into LAX and the plane banks, because your center of gravity is a little bit awry, for a split second, you don't know if you're going down or up. And it's easy to suspend disbelief and think you're going up into the stars and you're seeing all of these city lights. And so I went with that because I was coming back from a really nice reading, and people were, calling me a real writer and everything. And so I was already in space. Um, and then I picked my car up from the lot and I drove home, and I wanted to sort of keep that feeling going that, I had ascended to the stars, and now my little Honda was my little shuttlecraft and I was driving on home. And then there off to the side, I saw on La Cienega Boulevard, and you all can go there if you are ever in Los Angeles, Randy's Donuts. And Randy's Donuts is this icon in Los Angeles. It's this plaster and concrete and chicken wire donut that is lit up brightly and says Randy's Donuts. And by the way, the donuts are amazing there. There's usually a line, and usually what I do is I just get my donuts and I park my car and I drop the tailgate and I eat my donut and have my coffee. But in this case, I was just driving past and I was thinking, what if that were really a Stargate? And I'm just going to leave it right there.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice place to leave it. And all I'm going to say on that measure is you did mention that there is a mashup of science fiction and
Mhm.
fantasy, and it blends so beautifully. And I think a lot about the evolution of genre fiction and just how there's there's a wealth of it. And for a while, like I'd mentioned before, people would look at it and sort of sidestep it or maybe not consider it as worthy of literature as it really is.
Mhm.
But what I love is the blending that seems to be going on. And, Katrina comes from this generation of people who grew up with video games and video game music. I mean, just recently in the 2020 Olympics, which is really 2021, and that's a thing that sort of blows my mind a little bit. The opening ceremony used a lot of music from video games.
Right. And then I think at the end they even played Demon Slayer, which was an anime. So yeah.
Yes, yes, exactly.
I
And
know.
that is by far, I think, a testament to what you were writing. When I talk about it's writing about change, you have this teacher who, beyond the deal that she made and what we're getting to with Katrina, is used to things being a certain way. You play the violin, you play classical music, and obviously you have to be the best because this is the real deal. Here you're betting souls. But Katrina comes in with like this new life to what music is. And from what I've been seeing just in the communities of musicians, are a lot of people listening to classical versions of, or classically mixed versions of music from video games, music from anime, music that might not have been considered something that people would want to sit and listen to, but it really is what the generations coming into it want to listen to and want to play. So like I said, the mashing of genres fits very well with what Shizuka learns about Katrina and what this book feels like it's about. It's about so much. It's about, and again, like I'm kind of like holding back because I'm afraid I'm going to say too much, and I don't want that to deter our listeners, other than saying that, if you are into music, if you're into video games, if you're into anime, if you like science fiction, you like fantasy, you like stories that take you in new directions, this is the book for you.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I will tell you, and also with the with readers and with people who love books, a lot of times people ask, why should there be a greater diversity of writers? Are we doing it simply because, say, Asian queer people haven't been represented and we have an empty place on the bookshelf? That's one way, but I really don't like that way. I don't like to feel as if I'm part of a quota. I think of it as a potluck. What do I bring to the potluck that makes the potluck better? And here's what I think, that I think growing up Asian in this country, there's a few things going on. First off, the world of the academics. I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college. My father is a mechanic, and my mother never got around to finishing. And even before that, my family, my uncle raises pigs on the Big Island, and we're farmer folk. And so, although we were all taught to respect education, the world of my college and academic and intellectual life was very, very different from the world at home. So in college, I would be talking about PV equals NRT, the ideal gas law, we'd be doing, and then at home, it would be, don't whistle at night because you're going to call the devil, and you sprinkle salt on yourself after a funeral, and all of these things, and the reverence of your ancestors, and so I existed in the intersection of those two places. And I'm not special. A lot of Asians exist on that intersection. So when you think about it and you take science and you make it fiction, you get science fiction. And when you take, folk tales and you make them fiction, you get fantasy. And it's going to be natural for a lot of us to see a transaction between the two, but not necessarily a conflict, because that's what we've been doing our entire lives, transacting. And I think that sometimes when we have writers who come from different cultures, we don't see barriers and walls in the same way. Ours happen in different areas. Like, for example, I have a difficult time talking about myself, but it's, I find that what we can bring to the table is this very natural blending, the separation between science fiction and fantasy and all of the above and literary literature is arbitrary. However, if you are from a culture, if you've got relatives that go back to Salzburg, you're going to think that these are unquestioning, but that's why you bring in the new blood. We can come in and question it. Even classical music. I respect, talking classical, so I respect Mozart, and we even modern. I respect Bartok, but they aren't my direct ancestors. My direct ancestors are much, closer to Miyazaki and, and some of the anime people. So I find it, I think, less noteworthy and less of a jump to include them both. And, when you break everything down to music, it's all notes on the page and it's all notes in the heart and it's all music that we play. And if it touches somebody, mazel tov.
Very well put. And to that point, I've been to several weddings that have used string music from Miyazaki within the ceremony, because why wouldn't they? You don't, things don't have to be a specific way. And when you were talking just in general, it reminded me of a part of the book, and it's not, again, this is not giving too much away, but it's something that really struck me, where you were describing the neighborhood and the different restaurants and the different families and the different people who lived there, and it was just this very beautiful description of the world, and what, like you were saying, like what the different cultures and what people are bringing to these neighborhoods that were, at one point, like predominantly white, and everything was very specific. You knew what you were, driving down the street and everybody looked like you. But now this neighborhood, things were blending, and it branched out into what you saw on Main Street, the types of restaurants, the types of families. And there's no better way, again, bringing back to the story, to talk about Katrina and Shizuka's just story and the other characters, than this beautiful blending of things that hadn't necessarily been seen on the page or on Main Street in the past.
I think that that's part of the fun about being a writer, to be able to find those details and write about them. Talking back to Katrina, for example, is, and we'll get to Main Street really quick. So Katrina is transgender and she identifies as a woman. But the way I wanted to go about that is I didn't want to talk about her as static. So, and also the very fact that I'm talking about a trans woman and myself as a trans woman, there are questions about validity and womanhood that I care not to go into, because that's not the place and time. For me, it's quite never the place and time, because I got donuts to eat. I have friends to make. I have, a piano piece I need to learn, and, I need to be there for my friends. So, but with Katrina, what I wanted to do was illustrate the predicament she was in. So instead of saying I am a woman, I gave her an escape bag. In case you're in an abusive relationship, you put an escape bag together.
Yeah,
and
that was very effective. And one of the first things you learn about her is that she has it, and it gave an immediate sense of urgency to her story while you were learning about her.
And that's what I wanted to do, that sort of idea where we define things not necessarily through static descriptions, but it used to do this and now it does this. This restaurant used to serve this and now it serves that. Or they serve the same things, but now the clientele is different. And I wanted to show that a city, especially a town, can be dynamic. When I think about when I was in Ithaca, I traveled around the area and you would see these towns that I think people who don't listen and look would see them as frozen in time, but I wasn't seeing that. I was seeing change. I was seeing children. I was seeing the farmers markets where they had them. I was in Dundee at a bowling alley with 2 lanes, scared shitless, but the guy was really nice. You know, and you realize that nobody is standing still. Everybody is changing and everybody has stories that would fascinate any reader if they were just told, and anybody could be the main character of a novel.
Absolutely wonderful. So I have to ask a little bit about the whole the idea of the violin and the you mentioned that you had not played, but I did a little research. You're learning how to play violin?
Yeah, I actually I learned how to play to a point where, you know, I can follow along and I can play Christmas carols and things like that. And it's I think I I think that I've been good enough to fool people into thinking I know how to play the violin who actually know how to play the violin. I think the reason that I took to the violin, and I love the instrument. I'm primarily a piano player, but I love the instrument. You see, for those of you listening in on the podcast, hear the pitch of my voice. You can see I'm occasionally playing tricks with timbre to project some sort of gender identity. But on the whole, my voice is lower in pitch and I'm still really only speaking in the top registers of voice. I'm technically speaking in my head voice. You will occasionally hear me do a gut-busting laugh and I'll drop to my chest voice and it's horribly embarrassing and it's horribly dysphoric because that's not the sound I feel I want to be making. But the violin sings like a human being. And with the violin, I have the full range of tones and timbres. I can express in a way that I only wish I could using the voice that I have. So when I started playing the violin, there was this feeling of, aha, I can sing now. And by the way, that's in the book.
So I love it. And yes, it is in the book. And I love that the violin in itself is given almost its own, it's given life. It's not given life, it has life. And that's one of the things that's described in the book, which I loved. So I do have a question because you did mention anime before. And this book does have a deal with some sort of demonic entity. But I am curious if are you a fan of Madoka Magica?
Oh gosh, I haven't gotten there, but yeah, I know exactly what you're yeah, that's on my to read actually list. So sorry. Oh, here's the deal. One of the tragedies of being a writer, especially a writer who writes novels with the blazing speed of a poet. You know, where it's like, what did you do today? I wrote a word and then I erased it, you know, that. When I'm writing, sometimes I can't watch too many anime or read too many stories. And then I catch up on everything later. And, you know, suddenly I'm watching some sword thing. This is really cool. And they're going, that's Rurouni Kenshin. It's been out since God knows when. So I find myself when I'm writing feeling immersed in my own world. And then when I come up for air, that's when I catch up. And actually Madoka Magica is something that I'm supposed to be catching up on.
This book comes out the end of September, is it?
28th, September 28th.
And I have to, I mean, again, like I'm trying really hard not to just gush and give everything away about the book. But this was published by Tor.
Yes.
And are you doing book tours, like virtual or otherwise?
Doing book tours virtual, and I think we're still working out the details. We have a few events that are being published, and that should be on the Tor website and my website, which is ryka.com, ryka.com. Just really for everybody out there, stay as healthy as possible. And if you're not feeling too well, I hope you get better soon. I'm really super excited. If you're buying a book from Tor, I have to tell you, those are great people. And they have been nothing but supportive and understanding. And Tor has been amazing. I think that, there have been people who have been working in all facets of Tor, everyone from editors to publicists. So, when we're talking about building a writing community, and to people, who, although you're not from Tor, people who are reviewing books, who are editing books, who are publicizing books, who are selling books, we really are a village, and we really are a community. And the fact that I can sit here and speak with you is due to the synergy of all the good work y'all are doing, and I'm so grateful.
So once again, Light from Uncommon Stars
Mhm.
is going to be out September 28th, and this episode will actually be airing around that time. So
Great.
go to your library shelves, go to your local bookstore, find a way to listen to some wonderful string music of your favorite anime or video game, and just breathe in this book, and grab a donut while you're at it. And
Please grab a donut. How are the donuts at where y'all are?
I don't want to knock Dunkin' Donuts, but that's pretty much what we got. There are a few places that are around that have been opening with trying to do craft donuts, and some of them are good, some of them not as much, but there is, I'm going to give a shout out to a local place that has been around forever near Syosset Library called House of Donuts in Hicksville. It's a little diner type place. Their donuts are fabulous, and their sign is probably from like when they started. And one of our local coffee shops that roasts its own coffee in Syosset, and we have a little free library location there, serves House of Donuts, and they are amazing. They're fried. They're probably 1,000,000 calories, but who cares? They're so good. What are some things, because we've done a lot of talking around the book because I don't want to give anything away, but what are some things that you have not spoken about in any other interview?
Well, thanks for asking. With so much of this book, people are talking about what is different. They're talking about the mashups, and they're talking about the queer identities. And I've answered all sorts of questions about these things and the music. And I really love those questions. But I really do. And thank you everybody for asking them. But I think one thing that I've not been asked too much is motherhood. And motherhood plays such a huge role in this book.
It does.
Yes. It's the found, sometimes the literal family, sometimes it's the found family, but it's the passing from one generation to the next. I like to think about this book as sort of a love letter from, Gen X to Gen Z, or wherever is going out, because one of the drawbacks of being queer, and one of the big drawbacks of being trans, is if you have a desire to procreate, it gets complicated. And so for me, writing here, as you're reading, it's my way of being mom, or thinking about what it might be like to be mom. It's something that's really, I wonder what kind of a mother I would be. And so the characters are all, and I think for a lot of my work, the theme of motherhood is there. I think of the painter Mary Cassatt, where there's always mother and child. And I think my work will always wonder and question and push that bounds. I also wanted to make a metaphor for the cultural shifts in San Gabriel Valley, where there are generations of people who own a pizza parlor, and the next generation just happens to look different. It's an adopted child. It's come from somewhere else, but that doesn't mean there's less love. And I think that this country has to understand that the people who don't look like us aren't strangers. They're family. We're all family. We're all in the United States, and it might be, it might not be always a blood relationship, but we can choose to make things family. And I think if we do that, we'd really find that we have so many things to share. And I think that would make us all feel a lot prouder to be um, Americans.
That's amazing. And earlier on in the interview, the whole idea of the found family kind of popped into my head. And I was trying to, when you're talking about motherhood, I was trying to think of how, like, ways to say it without, talking about the other half of the story, which is the more sci-fi
Mhm.
aspect of it. But there is so many different dynamics, and one of the things, like I mentioned, like, Katrina finds a better mother figure in Shizuka, who's got, you find out, like, right away. You think you know what she's about, and people are calling her the Queen of Hell. Then with the family that raised her, and it was like heartbreaking but also sweet in this, at the same note. Shizuka, who's this character that you would imagine would not be motherly. I mean, she's literally in a Faustian type deal with the devil, and supposed to basically, like, not do well by her students because of this deal. She's more motherly to Katrina, and she gives Katrina the safest, most loving home, whereas her own blood relation did not.
Mhm.
And the theme of motherhood comes up several times, not just with their own relationship, just what a mother and child relationship is and what
Mhm.
constitutes family. And it's so beautifully done.
And the idea, and with the Donut family, with Lon, who has done so much for her family, and from the outside seems to be this amazing mother. In one area, which I'm not going to talk about, completely fails. And this is not this these things don't make people good or bad mothers. They make them human beings, because every mother I know has made a mistake they regret, many of them. And sometimes I think it's important to share that. I think when we depict mothers, sometimes we tend to either idolize or demonize to the point of caricature. And I really wanted to write characters who were women, who were mothers, who sometimes were selfish and sometimes were short-sighted. And so I wanted to sort of, put that in. And if you look, most of my characters, it's like the two main characters and the violin maker, there's a lot of motherhood here. And so this is why, when I first was writing this book, people were saying, well, it sounds like a young adult book. And I go, no, there are some young adults in here. But I also like to think this: you're never too old to be a young adult. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring the energy of a young adult book and the optimism of a young adult book to those of us who might be a little wiser, a little more, we got a little bit more tread on our tires. We're a little, we're middle-aged, and we get to be young adults too, because we might not have ever had the chance to read this kind of a book. And I wanted to write, that's my gift to people of my own generation. I wanted to write a book that was as optimistic and as sometimes as sentimental, as wide-eyed, as sparkly as any young adult book. But I wanted to make you, mothers out there, I wanted to make you the princess. I want to make you the star. I wanted to make you the one who we all care about.
Love that. And there's been, I think, this big blooming of adult books that would like to bring that energy in. I mean, I know when I was a young adult, there were no young adult books the way that they are now.
Mhm.
And I probably would have benefited from them existing.
We're kind of a lost generation.
Yeah, totally. Like, and this isn't to knock the people who liked the teen books that were out at the time I was a teen, but they just did not jive with me at all. And I was almost jealous of the people who they did, because I was like, why, like, what's wrong with me? And since young adult books have evolved so much, I like to see them tumbling into spaces where people who would have liked them, but maybe in their middle ages, a little bit closer to middle age, are finding literature that's for them. And there's no shame in reading a young adult book, but it's great to see it in a book that's for adults.
There's no shame in it, but being an Asian who's had to see myself in so many non-Asian roles and sort of do a little transposition in my head, I know just that feeling of when one feels that this book is actually has someone like them in mind. And that's what I hope to bring to so many women who have worked so hard.
So are you working on another book now?
Right now, I'm working on another book. I am working on, it's going to be sort of in universe with Light from Uncommon Stars. It's not necessarily a direct sequel, but we're just going to say when the aliens show up, there are repercussions. Right now, I'm really excited with that book. There's not much I can talk about. I'm 40,000 words in the first draft, and we're just humming along. With this next book coming up too, I think I'm going to, you mentioned anime and things like that. I really want to develop a little bit more of a Japanese influence is going to be in this book. It's going to be things like mushishi and some of these other these feelings of the supernatural. Well, I like this book, so I'm just hoping people read them. I'm hoping that lots of people read them, and I'm hoping that I can bring something really cool to them.
Cannot wait to read that one, and I really hope that you'll consider interviewing with us when it does come out.
Oh, that's a promise.
Awesome. All right.
I had a great time here, and
so did I.
I want to thank you, just everybody here for listening, but just sort of unsolicited. I want to thank everybody for supporting the library. Libraries were, for me, a place of sanctuary, a place of quiet, a place of nice lighting, cool drinking fountain. I still remember the cool drinking fountain. And librarians work very, very hard. And I would just like, and for them to do more work like this, to go above and beyond and to interview like this. I know they love books, but I also know how hard everybody's working. And I just want to say thank you.
And thank you for putting amazing books on our shelves that we can recommend to everybody, because I know I'm going to be recommending this one to everyone. So once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. Our amazing guest today was
Ryka Aoki and Light from Uncommon Stars. And thank you.
Thank you. We are going to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.